Hey guys, Tom Storsey here, back finally again for some more ball motion analysis videos. Sorry I've been away for a little while, but 2017 is going to be the year where we're on top of things, much more timely. Today we're taking a look at the Storm Phaze II. Storm Phaze II cover TX16 solid. It's a new cover. The velocity core, which you'll remember from the first phase. RG 2.48, diff 051. We'll kind of talk about those a little bit later when we talk about the ball that we are throwing it up against, which today is the IQ Tour Solid. Here's a look at mine. Pin under the bridge, 5.5 inches. Some of you will say, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to match up with previous videos, but made some changes in my game and have remeasured out my PAP, and it's further out than it used to be. So this is now a 5.5 inch pin. We have an extra hole down the VAL. The pattern is unknown. It seems mysterious. But the idea is that I bowled on something that I had no idea what it was. It was actually pretty challenging. And the idea was that there's a lot of times now where you're going to go to tournaments, especially things like the USBC Open Championships, where you're not going to know what you're bowling on. And as a matter of fact, I would say that when it comes to practice, it's almost more important to not know what you're bowling on, because I feel like being able to hone your recognition skills is what's important. We see how lanes transition if we bowl league. 5-man, 3-man, they're different. If we bowl weekend tournaments with random groups of people, and you know, they transition totally differently if you bowl a national tour event, because you've got higher rev rates, you've got bowlers that are smarter and more attuned to what's going on out there. And so the number one tool is your eyes, being able to create more recognition skills, to see what's going on the lane, to navigate the invisible course, and to make proper choices. I mean, bowling is all about making choices, especially now more than ever. There's a lot of people that would argue that the problem with the sport is technology, and I tend to disagree, because what we're talking about is having tools and learning how to use those tools, and there's a lot more things to sort through, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that that means being good at those skills is something that is important. So that's kind of what I try to do with these videos. So let's hop right into it, and we can take a look and see what I'm talking about. I did something a little different today as well. I kind of just started filming, and I didn't know what was out there. Like I said, I wasn't lined up, and you're going to kind of see me try to get lined up and see where I go from there. So let's take a look here. So what we see right away is that the Phaze II is a slow response ball. We see that when it sees friction on the lane here, making a very smooth motion around it, nothing jerky, which is something that's very usable, especially on fresh patterns that we talked about before. Things like alpha cruxes. You can see there I got one to the right, and it didn't check off the friction. Made the smooth motion, left a 2-pin. Get another one to the right, it almost buckets. So one of the things that this tells me about what I'm bowling on here is that it's probably not a fresh pattern. So I try to move left a little bit and slow down. We wrap a 10. It's still very, very smooth. Probably not the best matchup necessarily for what we're bowling on. Once again, we go a little slower, a little further left. We get the shaker. Definitely trying to find more oil. It's also a very high friction ball. And again, we kind of see the same sort of thing. Late 7 falls out, little mixer. So then we get one right from in where we're in the oil. We leave a 2-pin. So I try to move to the right. I try to get my angles a little more square and use a little more speed. Once again, we leave another 2-pin, but I feel like it's a little better with the high speed because of the amount of friction that the ball's creating. Get a little mixer there, but it's looking better. I get this next one in a little bit. We get a little wrap 10, but now I know I'm kind of where I want to be, because not only do I have control of the pocket, but this speed is matching it up to the pattern a little bit better. Then we get another good one. We finally get the strike. So now I kind of feel like that's where we're at. Very similar to balls like the Marvel S, the Alpha Crux. Higher friction, slow response time, very usable early on in blocks, very usable on the fresh when you've got clean back ends. Essentially, like we've talked about before, a fresh pattern is a quick response pattern. And the reason that I say that is there's a very defined point where the oil ends and the friction begins. That definition is a quick response pattern. So that's why we tend to use slower response time balls on the fresh. We need to slow down and get a medium, smooth motion off of the pattern. We don't want it to be too jerky, because once oil gets down lane, we're going to have difficulty, especially if we're changing pairs, navigating through that oil down lane. So the ball I chose to compare it to today was the IQ Tour Solid, and it's a ball that I expected to be quicker and weaker, creating less friction. There's a lot of differences between the two balls, notably the differential. Low differential ball, IQ Tour, not something that will flare a lot. Weaker core is essentially the idea. So what I expected when I changed here was weaker cover stock, weaker core. We were going to have to find more friction or get very slow. So I tried to stay around the same spot. First shot was a wrap 10, kind of a weak wrap 10. Tried to do a little speed adjustment, slow down. We get the little mixer with it. The weaker cover stock is going to get through a little easier. It's also going to have quicker response time. So when it sees friction, we're going to get a little more shape, which I think would be a better matchup on this. However, because of how weak the ball is, we had to keep our speed down. You'll see right here I get one way to the right. But you see the quick response of the ball. It sees friction there. It makes its move. It gets the strike. And that's kind of the difference here. They're actually very good balls off of each other when you start to see your Phaze II weak 10, blower 7 like this shot right here basically be used up in energy. You can get to something a little cleaner, a little quicker, like the IQ Tour. Comparing it to other balls, I think that if we compare it to other slow response, high friction balls like an Alpha Crux or a Roto Haywire, I think that it's not quite as high friction and not quite as slow. So it can also be used when you start to see those balls run out of energy. If you start with an Alpha Crux and you start to leave weak 10s, you can go to a Phaze II. You don't have to jump all the way down the line. It's a little bit cleaner, it's a little bit quicker, and it certainly is a good option to go to. So to recap for you, Phaze II, high friction, but not the highest friction, slow response time, but not the slowest response time. Basically something that people would consider a benchmark ball. I don't really like to use that term very often because I like to walk in the door and try to have my eyes completely open and do what I have to do with what I see, but I also bowl in a lot more environments than most people. I think that this is very usable for just the average bowler. I think that it certainly has a place in my arsenal as well as I think it should in anybody else's. Hopefully you guys like this. Glad to be back doing these. Street Fight is coming up next. As usual, you can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/TMSourcey, Twitter, @TomSourcey, and youtube.com/C/TomSourcey. You can still find me at the old address, but I have a custom address now. It's a little bit easier to find than the previous one. As usual, look forward to your comments. If you have any questions, find me somewhere on social media, right here on YouTube, and hopefully I can answer them for you, and hopefully you'll like what we have coming up. Thanks.